Okay, well, let's get going today, and let me just welcome anybody who's watching and participating today to our session all about postgraduate study in the Department of Languages and Cultures. My name is Alison Fiddler. I'm Director of Postgraduate Studies in the department, but I also have with me Dr. Delphine Grasse, who directs the MA in Translation. And we'll be hearing from Delphine in just a minute. Just to say, we are recording the session today and hope therefore to be able to make it available to others who haven't been able to come along today due to various clashes. Okay, just with us today also, thank you to Sophie Barton from the events department at the university, who's helping us out with some technical matters, and of course also to Ariana Esardi, one of our current MA students on the MA in Translation. Okay, well, I wanted to start off just so that I could say a tiny bit about the other MA in our department, which is called MA in Languages and Cultures, and it's also tagged as by research. Now, let me just say what this means. It's a kind of MA that's really for people who have an idea already what they would like to write a kind of master's level dissertation on, because the bulk of this master's is taken up with a 20,000 word dissertation. So that takes up 2/3 of the credits, if you like. So if you've pursued something at undergraduate level and think, oh, that is really interesting, but this is frustrating, I'd like to do more of this. Or if there's something you've not been able to cover, but it's on a period or an author or genre or something that you have looked at during your undergraduate studies or not had a chance to go to in your undergraduate studies, this MA will then allow you to look into that in more detail. Now, as well as the dissertation, you do undertake 3 20-credit modules. These can be in the department or broadly across the university. We find that there are lots of FAS, so the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences modules that students like to do because it's related, if you like, or it informs theoretically or contextually what they're interested in writing their dissertation on. So it's too numerous to give you a list now of the various options you have. You also do the compulsory skills course. That's called DELC 401, and it's skills for modern languages students. The MA in Translation students have to do that course too. And this is about learning the skills of setting about research, literature searches, source evaluation, abstract writing, presenting at conferences, using theory, all sorts of things. Okay, so if this is of interest to you, maybe give some thought to what did interest you, what you maybe didn't have a chance to look at in your undergraduate degree. You can look up the research interests of colleagues in Lancaster via our website, and you can look at their research and think about, you know, who might supervise your dissertation. And there's our email if you'd like to drop us a line to ask us about doing the MA in Languages and Cultures by research. Okay, I'm here also because we have lots of PhD students in the department who are writing doctoral theses on all sorts of topics. And, you know, if you are somebody who is giving some thought to doing a PhD, then do drop me a line, Alison Fiddler. So that's a.fiddler@lancaster.ac.uk, and we'll have a chat. Great. So that's just a short bit from me on this MA. I'm going to hand over now to Delphine to talk you through the MA in Translation and to give us a bit of a taster. Thanks, Delphine.
Thanks, Alison. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to upload my slides first. So as Alison said, I'm the current director of the MA in Translation, and I'm also a lecturer in French. So today I'm going to talk to you about Lancaster in general, about the MA as well. and then I'll give you a bit of a taste on translation in historical context, which is it's essentially a shortened version of the first lecture that I give on one of the core modules. So it's just uploading now. So if you have any questions at any point, just you can type your questions in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we can make it a bit interactive. So don't hesitate if anything occurs. And then we'll do the Q&A after my presentation. So today I'll give you a brief overview of the MA and then invite you to ask any question you may have afterwards. So I've already, so Alison's already introduced everyone here. So I'll just start and talk about the MA. So this is just to give you an overview of the MA. So the MA is to enable you to combine practical skills with intellectual and contextual study to prepare for a career in translation. And it enables you to develop skills in intercultural communication that are useful in many other professions. So we have MA students who now work in the publishing industry, who work in universities, in international offices, for example, and of course, many of them go on to become translators. So RMA combines, it enables you to combine language-specific practice either in one or two languages in addition to English. So the languages that we cover are Chinese, French, German, and Spanish. So the program, this is just a selection of the choices that you have on the MA, but you'll have to take 3 core modules on the program, and then you have a choice of optional modules. So the core modules are academic and practical methods in translation, which mixes translation theory with actual translation practice. And then research skills for modern linguists, which Alison just talked about, and she's the convener of that module. Hello, Alison. And then you have to do a supervised translation project. And this translation project takes the whole year to do. You have the whole year to do that, and it is supervised, and you hand it in at the end of August. So it consists of a translation and then a commentary. And then you have a range of optional modules to choose from. Some examples here are translating in a professional context, which includes a work placement, then introduction to liaison interpreting, translation as creative critical practice, and another option called reading theoretically. And you also have the possibility of taking some options outside of the department. For example, linguistics also offer some options you can choose from. So you would do, you need to do a further 60 credits of optional modules, and each of the optional modules are 20 credits. So what makes the Lancaster MA translation distinctive? Well, it's the flexibility to do research or choose more tutor-led modules. So we have a range of options which really allow you to do both. Some students prefer to focus on, have a very clear idea of what they want to study and research, and they tend to choose more research-focused modules, and others prefer to orient themselves in perhaps more in choosing more professional oriented options on the MA. Also, what is distinctive is that Chinese and European languages students study together. And I think Ariana will be able to testify to that, but it's really enriching for all the students. So our MA is really international. So the MA also gives a rounded overview of the profession and prepares you for it. So we don't just focus on one aspect of the profession. We offer modules that, you know, that on a very wide range of topics. And so you don't have to focus on one particular aspect of the career, and you can choose and try different aspects of translation. We also offer, we also have every year we invite visiting speakers, and as I mentioned, you also have the opportunity to do a work placement. So that's the end of the introduction. So I'm now going to give you a taster. And so, as I said, this is normally, it's part of a lecture that I give in Delphi 416, which is one of the core modules options. And in this lecture, I introduce translation in historical context. So I'm going to talk about why it is important to consider translation philosophies in context. How can this help us understand the cultural values, ideas, norms attached to translation today? And we'll see how the metaphors that we use to describe translation often inform our understanding of translation. So, for example, there's a famous saying in Italian, traduttore, traditore, translator, traitor, or which suggests that to translate is necessarily to betray. So these kinds of metaphors that we use to describe translation still inform how translation is perceived in the mainstream and how we understand what we understand translation to be. So is translation something, is it a process? Is it the product of that process? How do you, as students, as prospective translators, how do you think about translation? Is it a particular kind of text, i.e. not the original or copy? Is it a text that will be used in a certain way? Is it a particular kind of product to sell? Is it the relationship between two texts? Or is translation the position of being in between texts and of being in between languages? So there are many different ways that you can think about translation. And we'll see how people's understanding of translation has evolved throughout history in this very short taster. So translation is often perceived as the necessary evil. And we may, some people have asked themselves, is translation really indispensable? Can you imagine a culture without translation? What would be the alternatives and what might be wrong with them? So David Bellos is in a book called Is That a Fish in Your Ear, which I really recommend if you're interested in translation. Alternatives to translation. What could we do if we didn't use translation? So he said, instead of using translation, we could learn the languages of all the different communities we wish to engage with. Or we could decide to speak the same language or else adopt a single common language for communicating with other communities. And you might know there has been attempts to do that in Europe, for example. So some people have tried to create one language out of different languages. It never really took off, it must be said. Everyone always reverted to translation. Or David Bellos suggests we could simply ignore people who don't speak the way we do, which doesn't sound very good, very congenial at all. So the refusal of translation by one or more of the means described is probably closer to the historical norm on this planet than the culture of translation that seems natural and unavoidable around the world today. David Bellos concludes by saying one big truth about translation is that it's often kept under wraps one big truth about translation that is often kept under wraps is that many societies did just fine by doing without. So a brief etymology of translation which can also enrich our understanding of what translation as a practice is. Translation comes from the Latin transfere, which means to carry over. And that Latin root is kept in many other languages. So in French, it's traduire, traducir, in Spanish, tradurre, in Italian. And it means, it comes from the Latin to traducere, to bring, to lead, cross. And in German, the meaning is also quite similar, übersetzen, to put over. So we'll see, I'll show you a small timeline of importance with important translators and translations very shortly. But we'll see that translation is necessary and is both necessary and impossible at any point in time. It's always very often considered as being both necessary and impossible. And many translators have tried. Translation theory essentially arose from translators trying to justify their methods and to justify methods. So the history of translation philosophies is coeval with cultural norms and the measure of a culture's treatment and understanding of others, as we shall see. So the more closed a culture, often the more domestication of the text there is, the more people have found it necessary to adapt a text coming from a different culture into their language. So translation is inseparable from historical and intellectual developments, and the history of translation is necessary to understand the theory of translation, we shall see. So here are some important translators who are not so invisible, the invisibility of translators is a big topic in translation theory, which has been introduced by Lawrence Venuti. And so some not so invisible translators, and these are just a few examples. We have Cicero, who translated from Greek into Latin, and who advocated not translating word for word. He was one of the first to explain that it's actually important to keep your audience in mind when you're translating, in order to reproduce the effect of the text on the target audience. Saint Jerome picked up Cicero's tip and essentially said the same thing. He said, I don't translate word for word, but sense for sense. This seems quite common sense to us now, but at the time, particularly in the context of Jérôme's translation, he was translating religious texts. This could be quite controversial, but I'll talk about this with the timeline in a minute. Was a thought that a translator was morally responsible for making his or her translations resemble the original, but he believed that to do this, it was not necessary that words and lines be confined to the measure of the original. So he used the metaphor of painting to describe the process of translation. Friedrich Schleiermacher, so again much later in the 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century, believed that he was a German romantic, and he believed that actually translators should retain as much of the original, of what makes the original text different, and as much of the original language into the translation. So he advocated a kind of foreignizing method. And then we have Walter Benjamin in the early 20th century, who was a German critic and translator of Charles Baudelaire, who said, actually, translation is not about equivalence between languages at all. Actually, translation is not about communication between languages. It's not about communicating the text. But it's about communicating languages into other cultures and what makes these languages special. So you can see there's some similarities with Schleiermacher here. So I'll now click on this timeline and then try to share my screen with you as well. So you'll have to let me know if you can. if you can see this, what I'm seeing. So can you see the timeline?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So this is a short history of mainly Western translation. So I use it to look at give us a quick overview of important translators and translation theories of their times, and to explain what role translation played at different points of history. So I won't go through the whole timeline, which I usually share with students. And I think I'll mainly focus on religious translations up to Etienne Delhi, perhaps. So I talked about how metaphors inform our understanding of translation, but it has to be said that myths are also an important way of understanding translation. It has informed our understanding of translation in culture. And a very important myth in Western culture on the subject of translation is the myth of Babel. So the myth of Babel underlines most of Western religious and secular culture's relationship to translation as a form of necessity. So the myth goes that in ancient times, humans tried to build a tower that was tall enough to reach the heavens. And taking this to be an affront to his authority, the myth goes that God decided to divide people into different languages so that they could no longer understand each other, making translation a necessity in all their endeavors. Um, so it's not it gives it gives a sense that translation was almost born out of sin, and that it was a necessary evil, that it was something um, uh, that was a necessity, but that came out of human hubris. Essentially, that was a result of hubris. So another important landmark, a historical one this time, is the Septuagint in the 3rd century BCE. This is the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And allegedly, the story goes that they were translated by 70 translators who all came up with the same translation. So the story goes they were all locked up in different rooms, and miraculously, they produced exactly the same translation. And therefore, this gave it the same standing as the original. So I say it's a historical landmark, but you can see that it's actually also a mythical one. You know that it's also a legend as well. So and the idea is behind having all these translators coming up with the same text is that it gives legitimacy. It gives the translation the same standing as the original. So it was almost as if the translators were God inspired at the time of doing their translation. In China, in 144 to 413 CE, Kumarajiva is an important figure of translation theory. He translated Buddhist scriptures from Sanskrit using a unique style. So he advocated for translations which could be both exact and pleasant in form to the reception culture. So essentially, Kamarajiva ushered a new period of Chinese translations, which were characterized by a departure from the literist tradition, and which resulted in making Buddhism more accessible and more popular in the Far East. So thanks to his translation, Buddhism became even more popular and transformed society at the time. The Vulgate in 382 AD is another really important landmark in religious translation. And this is the controversial Latin translation of the Bible done by St. Jerome, which challenged the Septuagint translation into Greek. And it officially became the translation of reference of the Catholic Church in the 16th century, who wanted their own translation of the Bible to be separate from the Jewish translation. So here we have a little image of St. Jerome in his study. a really important, another much later this time, important landmark is the King James Bible in England. So the King James Bible is a translation of the Bible by King James, which was a great nation building exercise. So he was a Scottish king, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and he ordered the translation of the Bible as a way of easing state tensions. And for example, the King James Bible translators translated words such as tribe or community as nation wherever possible. So in total, the word nation, which doesn't, appear in the source text, it appeared in the King James Bible about 454 times in the text. So you can see how through a translation, especially of a text as well read as the Bible, you can manipulate culture and you can change the way that people think about their identity and about themselves in the world. And then we have the example of the Book of Mormon, and again to make people believe that the translation of the Book of Mormon was God-inspired. The legend goes that John Smith translated the Book of Mormon from an unknown language by using seer stones, or sometimes they're called interpreter stones, as glasses. And so he could interpret the word of God directly. So I'll stop with Etienne Delhi, and perhaps I'll say a few words about Les Belles Infidèles. But Etienne Delhi is an iconic martyr in the history of translation, and he was known for his irascible temper. So he was alive in the 16th century, and he was killed and tortured for having badly translated a passage from Plato's Axiocus. And why was he killed? Well, he was killed because the Greek text stated that after a person dies, there is nothing left. And Dole translated it as there is nothing left at all. Tu ne seras plus rien du tout. So there's a little quiz here. You might type. You might want to type your answers, perhaps. But why do you think Dole translations were considered heretic? Was it because mistranslation was considered a felony? Was it because his translation seemingly denied the immortality of the soul? Or was it that because he offended the previous translator in doing so? So what are your thoughts on this? Why would it be problematic to translate there is nothing left into there is nothing left at all? So anyway, if you want, you can give your answers in the chat. And we can talk about this in your Q&A. So an answer. Oops, sorry, I can't see the chat.
Oh, I can read you what's in the chat.
Thank you.
If you like. So Bastien has said here the Catholics didn't want the Bible to be corrupted in any way at all. And
That's
Delphine's
right.
nodding. Yeah.
Yes, I'm nodding. Yes, it's if the translation there is nothing left at all suggests that there is no afterlife, and essentially that was considered heresy. So yeah, Bastien is right. So you can see that translation at the time could be really dangerous business, especially if you were translating religious texts. So I think I'll stop here for for actually the presentation. Let me see. I'll go back to the slides. I'll have to upload them again. So, of course, in the lecture, I would go on up until the 20th century. But unfortunately, we have no time. I always get carried away when I start, but I have to stop myself now.
Okay.
So I'm just waiting for the slides to upload again to wrap
Sure.
up. I mean, if you have any questions about, you know, the short taster or about the MA, we can start. You know, please do write or raise your hand, or just you can speak directly. Ah, it's uploading again.
Yeah, there they are. It's super fast, really. Brilliant.
So, so I'll just finish. I wonder, after hearing this taster, do you see some major trends or questions or concepts emerge in this brief history? The Middle Ages. If we had continued, you would see more and more theories, more and more translation trends emerge. Are there any consequences in space? Are there any aspects of translation that seem present in history but unfamiliar or that are surprising to you? What and why? And then I think I'll just stop there because I want to leave you plenty of time to ask questions. So that's the end of the taster. And I thought we could kick off with questions from our fabulous MA translation student, Ariana, who's here with us today, and who's doing the MA with us this year. And I thought I would ask her what she thinks makes Lancaster special, why she chose Lancaster, and just to say a few words about what has been her experience of studying on the MA. And feel free to ask me or Alison or Ariana any questions after that. So Ariana, over to you if you want to kick off the discussion.
Thanks, Delphine. Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana. As Delphine said, I'm a student doing the Master in Translation. I actually did not graduate for my undergrad in the UK. I come from Geneva. I'm Italian. I was born in Italy, but I studied in Geneva. And I came to Lancaster during an Erasmus, and I absolutely fell in love with the department to the point where I came back for the Masters. Lancaster, you'll see if you decide to come here, is an absolutely international context. You have people from all over the world, every single background, everyone with their own point of view, especially in translation. Delphine mentioned we have a lot of Chinese students, which I think bring an amazing, completely different point of view from Western translation, which is what we are used to. Well, having someone that comes from a country that sees translation in a completely different way gives you really an insight in something that is not so common for us, I think. And again, you've seen Delphine doing her little lecture. The lecturers here are super passionate about what they do. They love what they do. You can see, you can feel it. And it's just a really great uni overall. The experience, obviously, you know, with coronavirus, we have to deal with what we got, but they managed to work with it perfectly. Everything's been dealt with. We're all missing in face-to-face, in-person classes, obviously. But I think, you know, they've been dealing with it absolutely amazingly. You're not gonna miss anything. This uni is just really, really good. The standards, the teaching standards, you know, is one of the top 10 uni in the UK. Is very well known even abroad. Why is it not to like? I don't know if you have any questions in particular. You know, if you come from a non-UK uni, you want to know about the admission process, because that's a bit different if you come from a uni abroad. Just ask.